Hey everyone, welcome to the Strength Within sessions. I'm your host, Aleesha Shimeld. I'm a psychologist practicing in Australia with a particular interest in Australian Defence Force members. Each session, I interview a different person about their experiences of life in and out of uniform, and together we come up with some tips that can hopefully be of use. Today's interview is with Ben Shepherd, known as Shep. Shep's our first RAAFie guest, and he shares his journey from aspiring lawyer to Air Force officer to cybersecurity expert. In addition to chatting about transition, Shep and I discuss some of the pros and cons of young people going straight to ADVA without previous life experience, and we explore the unique pressures that can hold. Shep has some great ideas about ways we could improve military recruitment, and he shares his own challenges in finding out how to balance ADF work life with his keen interest in triathlons, having competed at the World Champs previously. Without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Shep to let you know a little bit about himself. Shep, do you want to give us a quick intro of who you are and how you ended up here?
Yeah, cool. So, Ben Shepherd, obviously go by Shep. Joined the Air Force out of university in 2007. About 13 years full-time service. Got out from full-time service on the 30th of June 2000, and still doing the active reserve thing as a cyber nerd. My career post-Air Force has been quite varied. I initially went into a leadership role in a small professional services firm, went into a sales role at a multinational, cybersecurity advisory role, and most recently, I've kind of found what I've loved doing as a solution architect at Red Hat. So while I consult back into defense, I best describe myself as nerd adjacent. So I kind of get to talk heavily technical solutions, but more focus that on business value and business outcomes and helping the boys and girls in uniform. So yeah, that's, living in glorious South Australia and with my wife and two kids.
Yes, actually, you're the second person from Adelaide that I've interviewed. Although his interview will probably go on after yours, because as I said offline, I want to get yours on because you are our first RAAFie. Yay, first RAAFie. So you're going to take priority over him. He's a boring army officer. We've got plenty of those.
Ew, gross.
So what led you to join initially? I mean, I'm doing the maths on that in my head, and what I'm hearing is you were pretty young when you joined. But talk us through what was your motivation when you first joined.
Yeah, so that's a bit interesting. Ever since I was really young, I just want to be a lawyer. Because I watched episodes of Jag back in the day and went, lawyers are cool, all right? I went to Deakin Uni in 2006 and studied management law, and realized that it just wasn't for me because there was too much too much in the books, and it just started to get really boring. And I realized that I was spending more time drinking beers and chasing girls instead of getting my head in the books. And I realized I needed some sort of discipline, but I wanted some adventure as well. And I wanted to give back to a nation that had given me a lot, right? Like I was given a great start at life. And so the only road really sort of was the military. So I applied for logistics officer because I'm colorblind. I was identified as a CP3, so I could be logistics or administration, and boxes don't talk back. So went and became logistics. I also applied for naval supply officer, and I got my invitation to interview for that job literally the day after my letter of offer for RAAF Loggy came through. So yeah, so packed up from Deakin University in Geelong in November one year and started off at ADFA in the January of the next.
And nice. And looking back, are you happy with that pathway, ending up on that pathway?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating because I found, because I'd had a year out of home before a military context, I was given a lot more perspective around the challenges that university students faced, right? So at the academy, my peers who'd come straight from home were complaining that they were only making $400 a fortnight after expenses and all the rest of it. But they literally didn't have anything else to do other than go to the gym or drink or study, right? Whereas at university, you do all those things and you have to work to keep yourself alive as well. So I'm actually genuinely thrilled about my choice to go from civilian university to ADVA.
Great. I mean, it's funny you say that because it makes me think of a friend, and I'm not going to identify this person because I think they'd be embarrassed that they said this thing when they were young, and I have many things that I said when I was young I'd be embarrassed for, and I would love them not to put my name to them. So we were pretty young officers, and they were basically talking shit about people that were using, like, what's it called, like youth allowance to study, like university. And I was someone that, relied on that to study at university. I worked as well, but that you can only work so much when you study a psych degree and have to get certain marks to get through it. And I remember sort of saying, like, well, there's no way I could have done it otherwise. And this other person went through ADFA and was like, well, I worked when I was at university as well. And I had to be like,
I promise you it's not the same. Like, there were times when the curriculum was so intense that I had to choose whether I took a shift or not. And either I take the shift and I miss, how does the eyes function work, or I don't take the shift and I eat 2-minute noodles for 2 weeks. And I'll be honest, I usually didn't take the shift and ate 2-minute noodles for 2 weeks. And that's why I looked better in my life at university than I'll ever look again. But it is a very different experience. And I think, and that's not to say that it's easy, right, at all, because there's different challenges, which is that me as a university student, if I fucked up as Aleesha. I didn't fuck up as, a little officer cadet. And so I'm not saying it's that one is just inherently easier, but I think I see what you mean around, it gives you the perspective to go, oh, actually, this is not so bad. Like, that paycheck's coming in and I just got to not do the wrong thing. And yeah.
Well, I mean, and for exactly that point, right? And I think that touches on a really sensitive topic in Australian culture at the moment, which is, I came from civilian university where I could get absolutely written off on a Friday, Saturday, Monday night. Who cares, right? If I rolled into a unit lecture hungover, it was just a standard business.
Wednesday night is student night, isn't it? That's like
right,
100%,
100%. Roll out the goon cask, right? But as a junior officer, as an officer cadet or trainee officer, as they're called now, you had to uphold a particular standard, and you weren't allowed to go out on certain nights, and you had leave restrictions. And there was this from day one. It was drilled into you that as soon as you had the haircut and the way you walked and the way you talked, it identified you as a member of the military. So, yes, it's a completely different challenge, right? And what a lot of these children, like let's call them what they are. There's a lot of children that go through the academy. And they don't understand that. They don't understand that, they've been plucked out of year 12 and all their life has been is about studying and doing the academics to get them into ADFA. And then they get thrust into this really surreal world where they can't relate to that. And so I think having that year at university and going, you know what, I can have ice cream for breakfast if I can afford it. Like I can have a pizza for breakfast if the budget will allow it. I can go and smoke a bong if I want to because nobody's, as long, whatever. But you immediately have that huge amount of freedom and realize you don't want it. Makes the military academy so much easier because you don't feel like you're missing out on something. And I think that's where the root of this challenge is. So now we look at 18-year-old children that are in this military academy and people see them as officers already, even though they literally a week ago they were just a ratbag kid floating around Woolies. They've got this pressure on them that they don't understand that's actually a bit of a blessing in disguise. And look, we can talk for hours. We won't, but, the comparison between an 18-year-old military officer and the standard they get held to compared to an 18-year-old footballer or tennis player or sports star, it's such an imbalance of the responsibilities and the paychecks that they get. That double standard is something I think is quite an issue in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, it makes me think of, and I'm the first to jump in and talk about something controversial. Like, I saw that we wouldn't talk about any inquiries on this, and I've talked about every inquiry I could get my hands on. And like, it obviously makes you think of the whole ADFA Skype scandal, right? And I remember when that came out, exactly what you're saying, which was that you had people who had never served saying, this reflects the culture of the military, and sort of going, no, these people have been in 8 weeks. This reflects the culture of being a young person in Australia and probably is closer to young, early in their university career as opposed to military career. Like, there's nothing inherent in the military that made that behavior happen. There is something inherent in Australian culture of people that age. And it's interesting. And like, we don't have to get into that whole thing because I know that there's a lot of pieces in the background there. But yeah, I completely agree, which is that people are very fast to go, if anything goes wrong the minute you're in, they blame that it was something to do with the military. And you're like, they are still functionally late teenagers, and late teenagers do fucked up things. And the severity of that is usually dictated by the 17 years before that. It's not dictated by what clothes they were wearing at the time.
100%. And look, let's be honest, that kind of stuff is happening at universities worldwide.
Yes.
The key difference between what happened then and, what was happening in 2006, 2007 from my civilian days is recording devices were nowhere near as accessible. And it's just that secondary. But to your point, you're exactly right. So you think about the military continuum that happens particularly at ADFA. Now, RMC Duntroon, you're looking at 18 months for direct entry in or 12 months post-ADFA. Naval Academy is 6 months or whatever it is. RAAF officers do, from my last count, 17 weeks of intensive officer training. Now, at ADFA, because they can't do that, they have 3 years minimum from marching in to marching out. And it's that continuum that nobody says you are now in command of troops and you have got the responsibility of protecting lives until they march out of the academy. So to make the judgment call on some military culture for somebody who's barely finished year one familiarization training of how to march up and down a square and what end of the rifle to hold seemed at the time like such a sensationalized view of what the military was doing and saying that this must be the culture of an organization, when in reality it was just a couple of kids that had gone rogue. And don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning what they did whatsoever, but I don't think blaming a military culture on that particular act is a particularly fair assessment.
And if you draw analogies to other areas of society, I'd say it's funny because we don't do it in other areas, right? And we do it with sports people. So like a young NRL player, they will use that to tarnish the entire NRL. But I'm just thinking of like, if we use that, okay, when I was studying psych, right? Well, in first and second year psych, if something were to happen, some sort of catastrophic event, let's even say analogous to the Skype scandal in that sense, it wouldn't be that psychologists are doing blah. It would be, oh yeah, these students of psychology. I'm like, well, actually, these kids are students of the military. They haven't graduated yet. They are on a continuum, and we accept that they are on a continuum, and that is why they don't get paid as much as officers, and that's why they're not actually leading ships or doing their jobs or whatnot. But yeah, it is a lot of pressure to put on young people, because I often think, oh, ADFA would be good for, especially my youngest. I think he'd be a good fit for it. But I actually love to hear that you can go to ADFA, like you can delay by a year, because I think that you end up being, one, it's a lot of pressure to put on little young brains, but also I'm like, oh, you end up a level of sheltered that then takes another, 5 years, 10 years to get over, when you could have, as you had that experience of, you do a year of it and you go, oh, yeah, these things that I wanted to do or that I wanted to be aware that I could do, actually, they're not much fun. Or, oh, wow, there's a real repercussion if you like party all night and then try to do your lesson the next day.
Yeah, look, and the other part of it is, we can pull the thread on DFR as hard as you want, but when we talk about recruiting as well, you get this, especially going through ADFA, you get this, oh, you're the top of the top of the top, right? You're the top 2% of all applicants and you're amazing and you walk on water. And at an 18-year-old whose ego is still forming and who is still learning their way around the world, and the recruiting process can be starting as early as 15, right? Like these are young kids. If you tell somebody that their shit doesn't stink over and over and over again, they're going to start believing that. And if you have no circuit breaker from high school where you've got your letter of offer and you're off to the military, you have no circuit breaker between that and actually going. There's some really dangerous ego-boosting activities that Defence Force recruiting sort of jams down your throat. Then you go into an academy where people love to break you down and tell you that you're not in the real world and all the rest of it. That level of high and then straight into a low can really do some damage from what I've seen. And so I genuinely feel like I am really grateful for my year of university, because I got to look at my colleagues at university, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them now, and we've got successful journalists and engineers and scientists and all the rest of it. And they've gone down their own path, right? And they've forged their own path, and they've been very successful in their own right. So it allowed me, when I was going through the recruiting process, to sort of filter through the bluff of you're the best of the best. Like, no, I'm making the choice. And yes, I'm grateful that I got in, and I'm thrilled that I passed the requirements to get in. And sure, I'm at a certain percentile. But just because I'm the top 3% of people that apply doesn't mean I'm not top 3% of the nation. And drawing that delineation, it never gets done. And so that's when you see these clashes in Canberra City where people are like, oh, I'm at ADFA, I'm the best. And people go, well, you're not. And then it ends in a bit of rough and tumble. But the reality is that, we do ourselves a disservice by boosting the egos of these kids so much through the recruiting process to keep them coming in. I understand why they do it, but it's such a culture shock. It really is.
There's two things that stand out to me there. One is that it's funny because I told a story in the first episode with Warwick, and it was about an army officer who had bought into that, what you've just said of I'm the top percent, etc. And it's interesting because he went through RMC but not ADFA. So I'm like, okay, so that's a cultural thing happening at ADFA as well. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing that I sort of find interesting there is what you're talking about of you work hard to achieve this thing, and it takes time, especially ADFA. ADFA is very competitive, and you'll usually get people who by the start of year 11, people know if ADFA is the option that they want because they need to be putting in a lot of stuff. And usually, I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember at my high school, if you got into ADFA, someone from like the Defence Force came, and like at the graduation ceremony, it was like, and so is going to ADFA, and they got this and that and this. So it was a really big deal. And then you go straight out of your home, and it really strikes me as an opportunity for those young, like very early adulthood years are meant to be when you figure out who you are and what you value, but instead you go from your family home into an organization that tells you this is what we value. And so then it's not surprising that people will struggle if there's a mismatch, they'll struggle because like if I go and start a new job right now and there's a mismatch, I'm old enough and ugly enough to know, oh yeah, this just isn't for me. But when you're that young, you don't think this isn't for me. You go, I'm not for this, and this is the only worthwhile thing. And that's a really dangerous idea to have when you're that young. And the other thing is just that you can sort of, at a very young age, you can lose the ability to even go, who am I and what do I want to do and what do I like? Because this is what I'm being told success looks like. And then it can take a lot of time to go, actually, is that the case for me? Like at a civilian university, by fourth year, the people that I was in university with were not necessarily the people who had been in university with me in the first year, right? In the sense of people had changed, they'd changed degrees, they'd gone, I want to do more in that degree, I'm going to go backwards, or they just left uni and went, you know what, uni's not for me, I'm going to go get a trade or whatever. And none of those things were like wrong, right? Like we all had our own individual path, but I think that there's a strong sense of cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance being that feeling we get of I made a choice and I don't think I made the right one and it's very uncomfortable. Cognitive dissonance is much stronger if you are in ADFA or RMC and go, actually, maybe this isn't for me, because you're being told that this is only for the best people. So to say this isn't for me is to go, I'm not one of the best. And so that's challenging. But you're spot on, which is absolutely, it's competitive and you're the top 3 or whatever of the people that applied. And we know that not everybody applies because not everybody wants to do it. Just like doctors are super, super smart, right? And we know that they get incredible results through high school and that's how you be a doctor. That doesn't mean that the only smart people in the world are doctors. There are a lot of smart people that don't want to be doctors.
Yeah.
But the culture in the military, I think it doesn't necessarily, as much as it could, it doesn't allow for people to opt out and go, actually, maybe this isn't for me. Like it is very hard for someone to be a leader in defense, like an officer, especially once they've graduated, and then do a couple of years and then go, actually, I want to be an OR. I don't want to be an officer. It's I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's very close to impossible. It's
Well, yeah, you have to fail something that requires those officer skills, or you get out and come back in.
They won't just transfer you. It has to be very specific. I think in 20 years, I saw 2 people who achieved it, and there was a lot of like not for the individual, but there was a lot of like shame around it. And people were like, we don't want to let him do it because he'll regret it. And it's like, well, he knows it's a hassle. Like he's making a choice. And is that not maturity to go, you know what, this isn't for me?
And look, so I work in cyber trades in when I do reserve work at the moment, and that is exactly the bugbear that I've got right now. So there's 2 points I want to touch on here. First of all, let's go back to the ADFA story here, and you mentioned you talked to somebody who went through RMC Duntroon, and I think that's a really interesting point, right? Because not only are we talking about this is what success looks like, but it also gets drummed into you of this is how you should look, and this is how you should act, and we expect all of our officers to be big and burly and be able to lift heavy things and carry a pack a long distance and do a section attack. And that filters into ADFA as well. So you might have a RAAF engineer or a RAAF cyber warfare officer or a Navy intel officer who are then being compared to this standard of what does an infantry officer do? Because that's the standard. And well, maybe it's changed, but that's what it was like when I went through back in the day. So then you're comparing yourself to the biggest, strongest, fastest, most resilient person in your division. And when you don't measure up, or you can't run your fitness assessment in the same quality, you can't lift as heavy, you become, you feel weak, you feel ashamed, whether that's perceived or not, because we reward those athletically gifted people. We reward those people who are striving. And it's quite a weird juxtaposition, because you've got the university side that rewards the academic brilliance, but then the military side is the ones that they reward athletic brilliance, right? And brilliance on the drill square and all that noise. But you're going to get 2 distinct, very, very different groups of people that get up on the stage to accept an award. And you've got to make a decision very, very early on in your officer career. Which kind of person are you? Are you going to really prioritize going to the gym and running far and swimming and carrying packs, or are you going to forfeit that and go and study? And it's such a tough choice to make, and to the point that most people, just a large percentage of people, excuse me, go, well, I'm not going to do well at either. It's just too much. But to the point about, changing to OR, I've got such a bugbear in the cyber trades at the moment, because Defence Force recruiting, from what I see, and I could be wrong here, so please, this is the world according to me and nobody sue us, but I get really worried when somebody says, you have a degree, therefore you must be an officer. Right? That is, in this day and age, that is fundamentally flawed. And we're seeing that particularly in cyber trades, where just because I've got a Masters of Cyber doesn't mean I should have my hands on the tools the whole time. We have cyber warfare specialists, and it's them that have their hands on the tools. But because we've now generated this officer trade that because they have a master's degree, they get beaten up to the point they're like, well, you must have, during initial training, we go and teach them how to script and code and hack and do all those things, to the point that they're more technically advanced than the troops in some instances, and they're kicking the troops off the keyboard. So fundamentally, the role of an officer, in my mind, is to coordinate and plan and execute and report and do the things that are required to allow the troops to go and be the technical experts in what they do. But because of recruiting going, you have a degree, you must be an officer. No, the question should be asking is, do you want to do or do you want to lead? Until we get that right, we're going to have an imbalance of skills working through. And it's not just cyber, I'm using that as an example, but we're going to have that imbalance of skills all the way through the recruiting, retention, and training pipeline.
It's interesting because when you think about where that sort of bias for, okay, yeah, officers have degrees, you have a degree, you need to be an officer, comes from, it's so outdated. Like, it's outdated culturally and geographically, and that it's because Australia's military is modelled on the British military, and you don't have to look much further than uniforms and hat badges to figure that out. And the British have a much stronger class system, and so there was no way you could be an officer unless you were upper class, and only upper class people had degrees. And so it was an easy distinction that they could make without just going, you need to be from the right family. Instead, they could go, you need to have gone to Eton, you need to have done this, you need to have done that, and then that's how we delineate. And then we took the same model. One, I think Australia's culture is more egalitarian anyway. And I think that culturally Australians would, even 40 years ago, would cope better with the idea of there are people who never went to university who are exceptional, and there are people that went to university who are shit leaders, right? And I don't want to say anyone specifically, but I'm thinking about my brother-in-law, not a shit leader, just to be clear, but an amazing, amazing person. I think at this point he has 3 degrees, maybe, I'm not sure. But, he works at a university. Again, not trying to dox him, so I won't say which university, but he works at a university, he's in a leadership position, because that's how universities work. If you have a PhD, you get a higher up leadership position. And then he would be the first to go, yes, but none of my degrees were in leadership or education or adult learning or anything like that. And so because he's an exceptional guy, he can adjust on the fly, but it's not who he is. It's not why he got into academia to start with, but it's just how the pathway works. And it's interesting. So there are places where you see a similar thing, but I think that there's a lot of people in defence who got funneled the wrong way, either because they had a degree or because they didn't have a degree. And then what you end up with, and I see this more so in Army because that's who I work with more often, is young soldiers who really want to do more, who then go, I want to be an officer, and so I will get a degree in order to be an officer. And it's like, actually, probably if they just served another 7 years in uniform and then you popped them across, they'd be incredible, which is how RMC obviously works. But it's just interesting, the pathways that we have.
Well, I mean, so here's how outdated this is. I remember this vividly, is because I came through ADFA, went into logistics to start with, first role in the career, and I went, I've got my Bachelor of Business, and I met another young loggy, and I said, so you've got a degree? Yeah. What's your degree? In entomology. Cool. So you've studied insects, yeah, and did you do like a second degree in business? Nope. So we have deemed that just because you can study, doesn't matter what it is, you are now deemed qualified to be an officer. So I just, for me, it blew my mind that here's somebody who can't tell you the first thing about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how we manage HR, but we can tell you about the invertebrates that live in the River Murray, right? Like, but we don't, like, that's the thing. It's just so surface level. We don't care what the degree's about in that particular trade. We don't care what the degree's about as long as you've got one.
One thing that I think is a positive having, because psychs, once you're a psych major, you can do the selection boards. And so I've done selection boards before. And one thing that I think is really positive, and the challenge is I don't think this is part of the training for selection boards. I think this comes down to, were you trained by the person who's been trained? Like, is the information flowing down in that manner? But one of them was, look at how long it took people to do their degrees and make sure you know what their like living situation was when they did their degrees. And the reason for this is because if someone was living at home for 6 years and that's how long it took them to complete a 4-year degree, yeah, that's actually not a great thing, right? You're learning something about, are they a fast learner? Are they getting through this? Are they independent? Versus if someone finishes a 4-year degree and they only get, 75 averages kind of thing, but they weren't living at home, we would look more highly on that in a selection board necessarily than all HDs when someone lives at home, right? Because you're showing an ability to juggle two different priorities. And so I think that is at least a benefit. But you're quite right, is that there is still this idea of, oh, you can study and therefore this. And it's like, yeah, but like, especially something like entomology, which is so specialized. And it's like, yeah, someone who can study that actually may not be good at studying. They may just really fucking love bugs.
Yeah. Might have some sort of fetish. Like, cool.
They're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know that I'm an especially good studier. I loved psychology.
Mm.
And so it was interesting to me, and I can put my mind to anything if it's interesting to me. And if it's not, it's like pulling teeth.
100%. Well, I mean, I started my master's degree in 2011 and I finished it in 2022, right? Like, well, I started on a master's.
I was going to say, no, mine was 2011, finished 2019. So I'm not here to judge. I was working, I had kids, decided to do some half marathons in there. Like, yeah.
That's the dream, right? So, and I entirely changed my career from logistics to navigator to cybersecurity, and my master's started as a master project management, and then articulated into a master's of cyber. But it took me 11 years to get there, and kids along the way, and marriage, and relocations, and deployments, and yada yada yada. But as I said, you're exactly right. I love the idea. I think that's a really cool perspective of, well, great, you got your degree, and that tells me, and I've always believed this, a bachelor's tells me that somebody can tell you the questions, tell you the answers, and you can go and find the answers for yourself. Masters, they'll say, I'm going to tell you the questions, you go and research and find the answers for me, and at a doctorate level, you can go and ask the questions and then go and find the answers. It kind of tells me about the level of thought you're willing to put into something, but it doesn't tell me about anything other than that snapshot into somebody. So yeah, it's a fascinating point.
So in terms of career-wise, just hinging off something you said then, so what was your role when you left like full-time Air Force?
So I'm a weird case like that. So I'm my official mastering category, I'm Maritime Patrol and Response Officer, so Officer Air Crew. So I started as loggy, as I said, and then I got very tired of the air crew taking my jets and breaking them, and so if you can't beat them, join them. So went across to went to School of Air Warfare in Sale, and thankfully got the ticket. I always wanted to fly on the P3 Orion, doing the search and rescue and border patrol stuff. So I got on that, did that, and then at the end of 2018, I got this phone call from a wing commander at the time, so an 05, and he's going, "Hey Shep, I know you know support stuff from your loggy days, and I know you know operations from your flying days. Would you like to come and be the OPSO at the cyber unit here in Canberra?" Oh, okay, so that sounds great. Let me just talk to my wife and make sure that works for aligns with our postings. And he's gone, "Shep, you're not picking up what I'm putting down, mate. I'll see you on January the 14th. And I went, "That sounds great." So,
you're like, this is happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. So I got out of full-time as Maritime Patrol and Response Officer, but I was so heavily embedded in cyber roles at the time that my career had already started to deviate away from that.
So what was the highlight or a couple of highlights? What was your favorite thing about serving full-time?
So one thing that I'll always remember was we'd come off the back of an Operation Resolute doing border patrol stuff, and we got a phone call about we had to get to the east coast of Australia because there was a drug smuggling operation that was going on. It was really bad weather, and the police had lost the boat that they were tracking. The Navy had lost the boat they were tracking. They needed aerial surveillance. So we bust our way over to the east coast, extended on duty, did all those things that, that the textbook, are we, making those decisions as a crew. And at the 11th hour, we actually found the boat, called the Navy onto them, and arrested them. They did the shipboarding and arrested the contraband. I think it ended up being over $20 million worth of illegal substances that were seized that never made it onto Australian shores. And so we could have political debates about, border patrol and all that sort of stuff. But when I look at that, I go, we as a crew of 13 people assisted in a joint operation, including police, to stop horrible, horrible stuff from landing on Australian shores and potentially taking people's lives. And that to me really consolidated all of the hard work that went in and all of the systems working to achieve a truly tangible outcome.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love to hear that. And a real joint effect too in terms of how that played out. Yeah, I know what you mean around it's interesting serving in defense or even now supporting defense in the way I do of that. And I'm very politically left, which I'm sure I in some ways I deliberately share it on the podcast because I want to make people angry and then they'll comment and all publicity is good publicity. But I'm very leftist in some ways. And so then people have this idea that I would be against border patrols or something. I'm like, no. I obviously have views on immigration and things like that and how we use certain tools at our disposal, including border patrol. But it is undeniable that the majority of the work that border patrol does is absolutely beneficial to Australians. There's no question of that. As you said, it's making sure that people who shouldn't be coming in, because of their history, don't come in, but also that, this is how drugs get to Australia. We're an island. This is how weapons can get to Australia, So it is it's really good when you can do something really rewarding like that. That's a really cool experience for you to have had. So what was it that made you start thinking about getting out? Because it sounds like you had a pretty interesting, pretty varied career. I'm wondering what sort of led you to go, oh, maybe I want to look elsewhere.
So I was kind of had my hand forced. So if you look at my official paperwork, I got out for a more lucrative offer, which couldn't be further from the truth. Effectively, what happened was I was on I was 5-6 years seniority flight lieutenant at the time. 6 years seniority flight lieutenant, and I was thrusting for promotion, really wanted to get promoted, but because of the deviation that my career took into cyber, I got this weird random promotion code that said, you are absolutely promotable, but it has to be inside a cyber role. Okay, fine, not a problem. I'll look at transferring to cyber warfare officer. But at the same time, the cyber warfare manor that had just stood up and was sort of still being juggled went, yeah, well, look, we'd love to have you, but that course that you're mentoring people on, if you were on it as a student, you'd get the PM Keys proficiency, so the training code, and we'd promote you and move you into the cyber role, no worries. But you don't, so how does flying officer seniority 0 sound? I was like, well, that sounds like a 14-year waste of my life. And so...
That sounds like a big hit to my bank account. That's what that sounds like. Yeah.
Why haven't they been promoted? And I didn't want to have that stigma associated with me. And so I made the decision that, you know what, I feel that I can do better for the Defence Force on the outside, and I've always been in defence consulting and contracting roles since. I can do better for the Defence Force on the outside than I can do as a terminal flight lieutenant, or if somebody who's going to be another 10 years minimum away from getting promoted.
And when I say, to halve your pay, obviously we're just being silly there, but I'm like, but I don't think we should be ashamed of saying that is a factor, because it's yeah, but you also, at that point, you have kids, you have financial responsibilities. When I got out, I sort of went, oh, this is an opportunity. I could do this or this. And there was another sort of academic pathway I considered taking. And the only thing that stopped me is that I was exactly as you said, when I thought it through, I went, by the time I get fully qualified in that, I'm, that's 20 years down the track, essentially. By the time I can do the job I would want to do, that's 20 years down the track. Would I rather in 20 years down the track be, and it was a psychiatrist is what I was looking at, would I rather be a psychiatrist who's older but junior, or would I like to have another 20 years as a psychologist and hopefully be incredible? And I was like, well, actually, and some part of me is ashamed of sharing that story, because I chose the easy option, is what I would say, is I chose the known option that keeps a roof over my kid's head, and then I don't go through medical school. But that stuff is relevant. And look, you you didn't use this language, but I'd wonder as well if there's not a little bit of frustration when they're like, oh, this course that you've been mentoring people on, you would have to do that and you would start here. And it's like, okay, but if you were letting me teach the course, can't you just say that I'm
Yeah.
qualified in the course? So
Yeah.
that, for me, I would find that frustrating.
Well, I mean, it was really fascinating because I got one final PAR as I left, and my CO, who was just one of the best COs I've ever had, he actually wrote in my notes. He said, "It is such a shame that the Air Force is effectively kicking Flight Lieutenant Shepard out." I got a call from the manor, the aircrew manor at the time, and she went, "You know that nobody's kicking you out, right? You're making this decision voluntarily." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, granted, fair cop. But these are the options that you have presented me with." And the response was, "Oh, yeah, that's sad." So
Actually, it sounds like your manager was doing something really kind in giving the recognition of like, this isn't really that you're choosing to go. This is that we backed you into a corner. I'm like, I think that's really respectful of them to put that on the paperwork.
Absolutely. And, and credit where credit's due. As I said, I've come across some incredible management in my time in the Air Force. And this gentleman is now a 1-star, a naval 1-star who, every time, I've always still consider him to be a bit of a mentor to this day. But the amount of fighting that he went through in the 6 months separation, I wanted to give the Air Force as much time as possible so that I could cancel, letters of offer and all the rest of it. The amount of fighting that he went through to try and keep me to stay through the career management agency was phenomenal, and way more than, I was one of however many people in the unit, and, it took up so much of his time. So I still feel to this day, I'm very humbled about the level of effort that he put into to keep me in the uniform full time. Processes are processes. And when I've always, someone once told me, if you put an administrator in charge of an entrepreneur, bad things happen. And that's exactly what's happened.
I actually love that. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
If you're like in that cybery space, you probably enjoy it. That's me making a big assumption. I don't know. I don't know anything about computers, but it just, that idea of you put an administrator like in charge of an entrepreneur, and it's like you remove the best parts of both people. I think like you cripple the best parts of both people.
100%.
So it sounds like you had that one leader above you who was really supportive, which is awesome. How did the people around you react when you were sort of like, actually, this isn't, and I'm going to use firm language, not your language, right? But essentially, this isn't worth it for me to then have to pursue another 10, 14 years. It's what is worthwhile is jumping across here, being able to give to the organization in a meaningful way, in a way that suits me. How did your sort of peers around you?
Look, they were really supportive. They were like, "Look, dude, we'd do exactly the same if we were in your situation." And then, I think, okay, so it was a really strange time in the Air Force because there was this weird split, because I wasn't the only one who got treated like that. Like, I know of a good friend of mine who, he was the only blue operator who'd been deployed to do network analysis in a hostile environment, and he also got told, "Dude, you're not qualified to become a cyber warfare officer," right? Cried real tears, all the rest of it. So people were seeing, I wasn't alone, and because of that, people were seeing the split, and the retention rate dropped horrendously for people with cyber skills. So people around me went, "Yeah, dude, that's really shit." So I don't blame. I would have been gone 6 months ago, And then the other ones who are like, "Sucks, but I've got my ticket and I'm going to be on this career projection. So sucks that we're losing you, but it's all good for me." And so there was this weird mix. And so I look, my peers were genuinely really good about it, and to the point that I still keep in touch with them to this day. But yeah, as I said, people like, wow, I didn't realize, people made, and once again, speaking out of turn here, but people sort of went, well, that's made it very clear that this is not a career management, but this is a posting plot management. And because we don't have HR specialists managing people, there is no avenue for recourse. There is no special treatment. It is simply PM keys, numbers, posting plots, posting cycles, go on.
So I can ask a potentially stupid question, because I am less familiar with the RAAF than I am with the Army. So the manor, which for Army people who are listening, the manor is their equivalent of schema or docum. The manor is, those positions post in and out, don't they? That's my understanding, is that so they only know you for 2 years or 3 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So manor sounds very RAAFie, doesn't it? It's the
Oh,
manor.
no, each service has their own one. I'm trying to remember what the Navy one is. So.
Yeah,
Navy
yeah.
people, if you're listening, put it in the comments, please
Yeah.
educate me.
Educate us. Yeah,
I'm going to reach a point where I'm going to deliberately start saying like horrendously wrong things about the Navy because I'm so desperate to get a Navy guest on that I'm like, it's a bit of that rule of the internet. You don't ask a question, you put the wrong information out, and then people feel compelled to correct you. I'm going to start taking that approach.
Such a keyboard warrior. I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, you're right. Now the idea is, and here's the concern, right? So if you go have somebody who gets posted into a career management position and you know them and you've been on the beers with them or you've trained with them and all the rest of it, you immediately get preferential treatment without realizing it's just a bias, because when they see your number ringing in their phone, they're going to go, oh, cool, it's old mate, I'm going to have a chat to them. Whereas if you're a completely unknown entity, I'm never going to see you again. So why would I care? I just do what I can. This is the nature of it, right? That if you've got somebody who goes into a posting role or a career manager role and they genuinely care and they genuinely want to do the best for the service, you're in for a pretty good run. But unfortunately, I have seen people who go into those roles so that they can get visibility. They then all of a sudden get the most Gucci posting you could ever imagine straight out of that. And they set themselves up for the career at the expense of literally everybody else in their stream, because you've got squadron leaders managing squadron leaders, and you've got you've got wing commanders managing wing commanders. So yeah, that doesn't happen anywhere near as much these days. But it's just uncanny how somebody can go into a career management role and get such a sweet posting on the way out.
It's very interesting to me because I did my first ever my first ever civilian job, even like as a baby, right? Like 17 was in that HR space. And then my job through university was a HR manager's assistant. And it's interesting because in most big corporations, things like promotions or panels for like, particularly popular postings like, oh, we're a Sydney company, but someone gets to work from Hong Kong for 2 years, that sort of thing. A lot of companies will do like blind selection in that they will go, okay, and it's very much similar to what we do in, Army, RAF, Navy, of you do a plot of these are the jobs that I've had, these are the jobs that I've want, and then you write a bio, which is common obviously as officers, less like not so much for ORs, but for certain jobs, certainly for ORs. But the key thing is that bio does not have a picture of you on it, and it doesn't have my wife Judy and I love our 3 dogs, and it is a way that the plot can be done with a bit more fairness. And it's fascinating to me that we don't have the same model at career management across the board, because you're quite right and I've seen this recently of, my husband was serving full time. He got out and then went, actually, I want to get back in full time. And he was able to get a job. He has some medical restrictions. He was able to find something that fit. A huge part of that was that he knows the career advisor. And so, as you say, that person was more inclined to pick up the phone when they may not have been going to. And I don't want to say anything badly about that person because they obviously did great by my family. But it is human nature that if I know someone or my friend's friend is the person who's ringing, that is going to matter more to me than this person on a page who I have no idea who they are, who I've never met. And especially like certain jobs are different, but like in, for example, Sitecore, the career manager for Sitecore is never a psychologist. And so sometimes they've been transport officers, sometimes they're nursing officers. So then that really comes down to like, they don't even understand the job necessarily. They just have like targets on a page. And then it becomes how well does this person manage to sell to them that they can do that job. Whereas if we had much clearer, and it's fascinating because for, I'm not sure what it's called in the other services, but I know in the Army it's PAC, right? Like promotions and what is it? Can't remember what that stands for. May have to overdub this. Promotions and something. Or like, and promotions and appointments and all that kind of thing. In those environments, they have a much fairer way of doing it. They still know who they're talking about, but they go to this effort. And it's interesting because I'm like, yeah, and it is important to do that. But why do we not think that that's important for moving people around every few years or, making these kind of really big decisions about whether someone can do a job or can't do a job?
And look, to be fair, the other part of it is, so we do kind of do that in the promotion cycle where it's blind promotions and all the rest of it, but not for like special postings and all that where you have to write an EOI. The other part of it is that like I've never seen a specialist HR person in uniform. Like so we have in the RAF we got personnel capability officers, and it's kind of their remit. But they're not the posting managers. They're not the redress of grievance experts. They're not the ones who actually understand what's going on. And so the last time I checked, I've not seen a pilot managing the careers of other pilots. They still have HR get involved in that. So I think one of the most underrated trades that we have specifically in the Air Force is that personal capability officer, because at the moment they're managing budgets and they're notic hazards, so people getting sick and injured and briefing CEOs and all the rest of it and doing leave paperwork and all the rest of it. But it's very rare to see them get involved. If somebody's got a genuine issue with a posting cycle and all the rest of it, it falls back to command, it falls back to the career management agency, who may or may not really care about the individual, right? Like, and you hope they would, and you really want to put your faith in that, but we don't have specialist HR training for HR specialists. We don't have career management specialists. We have posting plot specialists. And I think that when we start talking about the issues around recruitment and retention and all the rest of it, we're getting better, but I think there's still a long way to go when it comes to, because I mean, my advice, especially as a civvy now, is think about what you want your career to be. What do you want to be doing in 10 years' time or 5 years' time? The posting cycle in the services, Army being 2, RAAF and Navy being 3, all you're thinking about is what's that next posting. That's all you can think about, because so much changes and it's so variable, and you can't start scripting how you want your career to go and how you want to be a specialist in something, because you are simply beholden to what the next posting cycle will bring.
Yeah. Oh, especially like I noticed that in Sitecore, there's certain jobs that essentially if you didn't get, SO3 aviation psych, you weren't getting SO2 aviation psych and you weren't getting SO1 aviation psych. And that's not the case now. I have to say that is definitely not the case. It's still true in some spots. Like SO1 SOCOM is not going to have turned up for the first time in SOCOM at that point, kind of thing. And some of that makes sense, of course, but it does. It's interesting, which is that you're like, if you're talking about getting someone into that model at SO3 level, that's pretty junior. That's a captain, right? They've got to make that call 2 years in the organization. Otherwise, they're not on the right path. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think you're right. Like, did you say they're called personnel capability officers? Is that the title?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's great. Army doesn't have an equivalent to that, and it needs it, because what you get is then people doing those kind of tasks that you talked about just as an adjunct to the rest of their role. And for some people, taking that on board, doing great. For some people, hating it the whole time and paying it off. Like, because if it's just an extra Reggie, it's easier to pay off an extra Reggie. Like, yeah. Not so much notic hazards. People pay attention to whether those go in or not.
Yeah.
But budgets, things like that. We have OPSOs, which obviously OPSOs are in the budgeting space as well. But again, they go in for 2 years as an OPSO and they come out. So it's a big learning curve, learning how to do defense budgeting in that time period.
And look, so our closest equivalent is, so our PCOs are supported by PCS, Personal Capability Specialists, which is our equivalent of your clerks.
Yeah.
But once again, right, I've not seen the officer equivalent of a clerk, because we just manage the clerk as they're an enabler to the unit rather than their own vertical. And so I think we've got the groundwork laid, but it kind of scares me a little bit that it's going to take a serious mishap inside the ADF to really start putting a lot more, oomph and resources into upskilling personnel capability specialists and officers to really think about the human element. Like they do, and don't get me wrong, they do a great job, and I wouldn't be able to do it myself because my patience is too short. But I just feel that until we can upskill and uplift the value of what a PCO does from that human and interaction and valuing the soul component, I think something's going to happen at some point.
I think you're spot on. I think it's already happening in the sense of that the military is a very popular career at certain times in like the political climate, in the economic climate. And then when those conditions aren't met, it becomes a less popular career. And having HR specialists would be what would enable it to always be an attractive career. And and this is something I've talked about. I reckon it comes up in every podcast of, I think that we do everyone in the organization a disservice by not embedding some sort of, like, whether it be that we have a HR mustering or core or whatever, or whether it be that we embed that in leadership training earlier, how to actually manage people, not how to lead or how to like command, but actually managing, which managing by definition is going to require that you adjust to the person in front of you.
Mm.
And I see that. I was talking to some like colonel and a brigadier equivalent. They were talking about, we just came out of COVID and working from home and all that, and they were so glad to not be working from home because the nature of the job that they did, truly, it crippled the capability, right? It was very hard to get work done, and I would back that wasn't about their management. But they were saying, oh, do you think that working from home is a good thing or a bad thing? And I just, classic psych, I kind of didn't want to give an answer to that. I said, I really think it comes down to the individual. It comes down to the work being done. It comes down to the kind of team. And has the team already been established? And, there's a million pieces to that puzzle. I couldn't just universally say good or bad. And then one of them was like, well, because I read a study that people are more productive when they're in the workplace. And immediately I can't help but like science practitioner it when I hear something like that, where I went, cool, how many people were in that study and what was the nature of the work and how far did they live from their workplaces and how long had the team been I'm like, there's a million pieces there, but this is someone who is in a job because he's quite smart. He's doing a great job and he's considered by the organization to be a really intelligent guy. But I'm like, yeah, he's just fucked up in terms of like saying that in Psych 101, describing a study like that and going, this study said that was good and therefore it's good. Great. You just got an F. Like,
Yeah. Well, and look, I'm doing that with my 8-year-old daughter at the moment. Like, I'm educating her because she'll go, all frogs are bad. Okay. Let's just stop for a second here. What about red frogs, like from the lolly packet? Oh, yeah, they're all right. So are all frogs bad? And so like, we can go on another tangent here, but I think it's a sign of consideration, intelligence, and empathy to be able to propose that by going, actually, I did read a study. I think it's quite interesting, but this study suggested this, instead of saying, I think because of one piece of data that I'm going to hang my hat on, at least it was one piece of data, rather than just making the bold assumption that everybody who works from home is a slacker, right? I think you're right. But unfortunately, one of the things that I do notice in these RAAF trades is that we get really, really, really competent at our own wheelhouse. Really competent, right? Pilot's going to pilot, right? Tanky's going to tanky. But at the end of the day, when we see people go into these senior leadership trades and making these strategic level decisions, the further removed they get from that core duty, right? Whether that's flying an aircraft or hacking on a cyber or doing engineering work, they become at a certain level, and that's probably at your colonel and above, they simply become people managers and strategic leaders and strategic thinkers, and that's what we pay them for. So for me, it's really disappointing to hear somebody go, I read one study, therefore you are wrong, or therefore this is a statement of fact. Because that's not what a strategic leader does. And, that's like saying, oh, I saw one drop of rain, therefore it must be raining, right? Like it's not as black and white in that. And we're seeing that really come out, I suggest, post-COVID times, where the work from home debate really has sparked a nationwide or global argument as to what's the right path forward. And we're rapidly discovering usually it's a blend of everything.
And it's funny, in my workplace, I am a public servant, so I get the luxury of a flex working arrangement. So my flex working arrangement is that I work a compressed week. And one of those days of that compressed week, I work from home for like 10 hours. And it's so funny because my team hate it when I work from home, not because they can't reach me, but because I churn so much work out that by the time they get to their desks at 8 o'clock, they've got 50 emails and they're like, you are not allowed to send emails until 12 o'clock. You need to give us a pause. They're like, I'm not answering your emails till 12. If you're going to have to call me, like, because I just get in there and I'm like, cool, one job, no one else in the office. I'm in my jammies. I'm comfortable. I have the temperature just right and I can focus, right? Whereas you put me in an open plan office, I have a lovely time, but I am like, it's my year 3 report card all over again. Like, Aleesha's a bright girl, but she distracts others once she's finished.
Yep, 100%, 100%. And look, I'm the same. So my office is actually based in Canberra. So when I'm at home, right, I do probably 80% of my work from a home office. But that enables me to then, when I interact with clients at client side or when I travel to Canberra, it allows me to really absorb what's going on and be that sort of that outsider and observing what's the dynamic in the office. It's I think it's really cool. Anyway, we can digress because this is not a podcast about working from home, but look, it's an interesting conversation.
Look, and yeah, I'm sure I could talk to you all day, but I'm noting the time and that, I only paid for the hour. That's a joke. He's not being paid.
No, you're right. I'm
just
still
wanted to
poor.
clarify. I just wanted to clarify because I was like, no one else has been paid and I don't want anyone to like be like, where was my money?
You told me as a solo RAAFie, I was getting paid. I'm not mad. Yeah. I'm just disappointed.
Well, you were naive and I'm sorry you fell for it. No.
Buyer beware. Great.
Well, in terms of getting back into that transition-y space and with your experiences, and I know you had a little bit of a different transition, but actually I like people that have gotten out in different terms because I think when I told people I'm going to do a podcast about transition, what they imagined was you're going to tell the horror stories of transition. And actually, that's not at all what I ever had in mind. What I had in mind was let's tell the highs, let's tell the lows, let's get out information that can help people. So in saying that, is there anything that you think that people should sort of consider or take action on before they get out or when they're in that process?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Absolutely. I literally gave a presentation on this at my reserve unit yesterday because
Nice. So you're well prepared.
well prepared. I bring up the presentation and here we go in 3, 2, 1. No, so one of the things that I wish I'd done, really wish I'd done when I was getting out is sit down and go, what is it that I love about my job? What gets me out of bed in the morning? Is that talking to people? Is that affecting capability? Is that flexibility? Is that the contribution to others? What is it that I love about my job? Because then that would have helped me on the job hunt moving towards it. And so when I took 4 years to learn that lesson after I got out of uniform and floated around all these different jobs until I went, you know what? I've been doing this all wrong. What is it that I genuinely care about? And so I created a list of, it must be X amount of dollars because kids can't eat love. It's got to, I want to be in a position where I can use thought leadership to influence both internal and external to the organization. I want to have career progression that's well defined so I can see where I can be in 5, 10 years. I need to have flexibility to work from home as well as interact with people off site. And I need to be able to travel because I genuinely love traveling for work and seeing new sites and meeting people in an area that's my own because I think that we get too comfortable with comfort zones. Those are the things that when I went through and went, I need to find a job, literally need to find a job that ticks every single one of these. And I'm not settling until I find that job. Now I've been in the role for 15 months and I couldn't be happier. And so that is what I would encourage anybody who's thinking about doing, and write it down because as you mature in your career, both professionally and personally, that absolutely changes. As you have kids, as you find a partner or choose to stay single, whatever you choose to do, right? You do you, but your priorities will shift. And if you only leave because of the money, and that's the only reason you're getting out, unfortunately, the gap between civilian pay and military pay, well, fortunately, it's actually closing. So there has to be, in my mind, if you want to be successful on the outside, there has to be a reason that's more than just money. And a quick tip that I would tell anybody for free is if you are getting out because you hate the military and you're done, which is okay, and you think you've been treated like dirt and you're just cooked, don't ever consider applying for like an MSI, like a military systems integrator or a military facing role.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who's gone through the recruiting process and recruited people, as soon as I hear, I got screwed in my career and F this and F that, I'm not interested because I find people who get out and their career may be cut short early for medical reasons or for reasons like mine where you've had to make a values-based decision. But people who still genuinely care about what the military does and what they deliver on behalf of the Australian public, those are the people that really can thrive on the outside. But if you're cooked and you're done and you hate everything that is there to do with the military, go and find something that's completely outside of that. And case in point, right, like my wife, I've been she joined military at the same time as me. She did full time a little bit longer than I did, and she's hit a point where she was doing sort of the reserve thing 3 days a week after the birth of our second child. And eventually she realized that she was really tired of it. Every time she had to log on to the Defence Protected Network and it took half an hour, the toys came out the cot. And it took her sitting there going, what do I want to do? And now she's, nearly a semester through teaching, which is completely away from what she's done in the military. Now she's bringing that experience in, which is brilliant, but she's not dealing with the minutiae of the military stuff. Because I can tell you now that anybody who deals with those organisations that support the military, you still deal with the military stuff. It's just on a different side of the fence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point. That's actually similar in terms of that idea of what do you love about it. I think it's important, and I think it's important we pull that out of. You're not actually talking about a pros and cons list because people sometimes will hear that and they will go pros and cons, right? It's like, no, this is actually different because if it's about leaving the military or staying, pros and cons won't capture what you're describing because what you're doing is you're coming up with your shopping list for what does the future need to look like for you. And you can also go, I remember when I was looking at getting out, I was on a deployment and a civilian job had come up that was very rarely came up. And I was like, oh, do I want to get out now? It was a bit ahead of the plan. And I did the same thing. I went, what do I love about serving? And then I went, and what do I not love? What would be the things that, are the things that might push me out of here? And then I got the job that I was going for and go, and which of these align there? But also importantly, which of those things that might push me out are also true over there as well? Because that's an important thing is a lot of people will go, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be told what to do. And it's like, cool, you're always going to be told what to do unless you just entirely do your own thing, which is fine. But there's very few people who, if they liked the level of stability the military provided, want to go and start their own business immediately.
But
and it's a big money.
And sorry to cut you off, but you still get told what to do when you own your own business. Because if
There's
you
still
are
rules, there's still governance, there's still, yeah.
there's still
And so I think,
clients that want something from you.
yeah. And I think it is a really important thing to do. And also to go, what is it that I enjoy? And can the job provide that? Or is there something about the dynamic or the nature of that job that means that I can provide it for myself in other ways? And for example, you and I are both people who enjoy physical training. That was one of my big things. What do I enjoy about the military? I enjoy that they pay me to train. I knew that there is no other job that does that, right? And I didn't want to join the police force, and those are pretty much my options. And I don't think the fireys would have me. Actually, to be fair, I don't think the police would have had me either. But if I'm being honest, my social media would have got me blacklisted. But that's such a sidebar. Sorry. So wanting a job that could maybe meet that need was not going to be realistic. But what I could do is go, right, is there a job that meets those other needs and means that I work less hours and therefore that I can train without it having to be at 4 a.m. Or that maybe it still has to be at 4 a.m., but the rest of my life is so rewarding that that's the fatigue I'm willing to pay. And so I think it is a really important thing to do. And ideally, you do it before you're looking to get out because it helps you to get clarity. And the other thing is that, and it's funny because it's actually the other guy from Adelaide, his name's Pete, his interview will be on in a few weeks probably. He and I talked about, he got out, he did his long service leave and then realized he was sort of trying to do a different career pathway that wasn't going to work. And he went, right, well, if I get back in with a different mindset. And so that circuit breaker still allowed him to do that kind of consideration of what does serving look like for me now? And so I think whether you end up getting out or not, it's such a valuable exercise to do. So I'm really glad that you brought that up and that you had a positive experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I completely agree. So for as you're aware, I'm mad keen triathlete. Come from 100 kilos and smoking a pack a day. And look,
actually, I was going to say you're our first triathlete too, first RAAFie and first triathlete. That's pretty good.
Yeah. I'm actually on the treadmill as we speak. You just can't see it. So it's quite fascinating, right? Because I in one of my postings, I got berated for training. Berated. Because that's not what we do here. And if you want to be a triathlete, then I can kick you out tomorrow and you can go and do that. And since then, I was kind of like, I almost lived, as much as I hate to say it, because it sounds like I'm dodging security clearance questions, but I almost lived two lives. So my social media life was all about my training and dedicating myself to my sport. And my work life, I was embarrassed. I was genuinely embarrassed to share about my triathlon until I ended up redefining myself with posting to camera and being the cyber guy. Once I got out of the flying roles and the cyber guy that does triathlon, kind of it sat really well. And for me, it's like in my role at the moment, I get people asking me how the training is going. I get asked about race results. I get people who celebrate with me when I went to World Championships last year. I get people who see it as such an incredible asset instead of a burden. So, my boss, and big shout out to my boss at Red Hat, who goes, Shep, I don't care. You're getting the job done. If there's a company call on and you're on the bike, but you're paying attention, I don't care. If you want to go for a swim at lunchtime, I don't care. If you are at work less than your training, then we've got a conversation. But you should never feel ashamed of making work, as long as you're achieving, making work fit around the stuff that brings you joy, because that makes you a better employee, like, without a doubt. And so it's actually been a reconciliation journey for me to go, I shouldn't be ashamed of my passion for fitness and health, because if I'd stayed in the previous postings and in that cycle, I'd go back to smoking and I'd be still off drinking and I'd be well on my way back to 100 kilos. because that's just the done thing. And if you can't drink with the boys, then you're on the outside. And it's a really bad place to be when you're on the outside.
Interesting. First of all, yeah, you should absolutely be applauded for that. Like that's incredible. Like I always think of this as terrible. I don't mean to undermine your experience because I'm genuinely impressed, but it always makes me think of that silly joke, which is like sharks can swim faster than I can, but I can run faster than sharks. So in a triathlon, it comes down to the bike. But it's genuinely incredible. It's also like, because yeah, as you said, you went to world championships. This isn't just like you haven't just jumped into like a random triathlon. You've done it once and now you call yourself a triathlete, right? I'm like, no, this is something you do consistently. And I'm like, actually, it tells you something about someone's character. You can commit to something, you can make adjustments, you can multitask, you can prioritize. And it's funny because I actually think in the army, probably they have the opposite problem, right? Which is that you were getting kind of told, don't do that. You know, that's not what we do. And you weren't feeling supported. And in the army, often the flip is if you're good at sport and you do that, they will put up with a lot of shit. Whereas your boss now has this, it's perfect. It's how you manage adults, right? You have a hobby like that also keeps you, we know that being an athlete makes you mentally sharper, improves mood, improves concentration. So these are all positives. As long as you're getting the output you need, great. Whereas I definitely saw people in army where I knew someone who she was on a deployment and she would train so hard and eat so little. And there's obviously something to be said mental health wise about that, but this was not a client, this was, a peer, that in the afternoon she would have to go and take a nap. And then her boss would be like, oh, where is so-and-so? And then the other people of that rank would have to go, oh, she's having a sleep because she's too tired. And it pissed the boss off immensely. But the culture is so strong around like, well, you can't punish someone for training. And you're like, yeah, you can because their job isn't a fucking train. So it's fascinating to me that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting little cultural difference. And I hear what you're saying, which is that some of that was to do with the specific workplace you were in. So I don't want to speak for all army workplaces either, but I'm glad that you've been able to get that, I guess, get that balance and get that support. Because that is part of who you are and that's okay. Like it's the more you can have in your life that is part of your identity outside of just one thing like your job or outside of just one thing like your family, that's all really positive. Doesn't matter what that is.
So I it took me a little while, and it probably was around 2019 that I came up with like a few little theories about what I'm or why I'm here effectively. And I'm happy to share that in your life there's effectively three main pillars, which is your professional life, so what you're doing at work. There's your family life, and then there's your personal pursuits. And it's really, it's near on impossible to have all three of those things in sync and working perfectly and thriving in all three of those at the same time. The best you can hope for is two at any given time. And sometimes you've got to prioritize one over the other. And I get it. And look, I'm not blameless. I was in 2016 when I went to Hawaii for World Championships. There's a lot of training and flying at the same time. It's a nightmare, don't get me wrong. So not blameless in that whatsoever. I accept responsibility. But it's taken, what's that, 10 years ago now, and to really grow comfortable in putting a line in the sand and being able to share, with my wife and my family, go, guys, I really do have to train because I've got this race coming up. So I'm sorry, can you please do the netball run? Can you please take the kids to dancing? Because I've got to get on the bike and do this 5-hour ride, or I've got to go and practice my 30K. And work is work, and obviously there'll be peaks and troughs and all the rest of it. And knowing how to read those cues and how to balance it appropriately, that is a life skill that I don't think. If somebody thinks they've nailed it, I cry shenanigans, because I think it's such a moving feast and such an evolving challenge that, with the way that life throws things at you, knowing when to prioritize and what to prioritize is such a critical skill that I don't think anybody has truly nailed it 100%.
And the people that I would say, I'm thinking of people in my life that I would say as an outsider, it might look like they're older people, right? Like they're people who have been much better able to accept this concept of, and I don't know if you've listened to the podcast I did with Jacob Choi, but he had this really beautiful way of describing it, which is this idea of that there are seasons to life, right? And not only are there seasons, we're kind of on the same we're on a highway through those seasons and we're going to change lanes. And I really liked it, that idea of it. Sometimes the family needs to come first. Like when the kids are very little, it's very hard to train for a triathlon. When they're a bit older, you get that flexibility. And then there could be a time when actually, maybe they're teenagers and they may need more time with dad, and you'll have to adjust. But something I'm thinking of doing an individual video about is the idea that peak performance and peak wellness are mutually exclusive concepts. Because I think in the military, peak performance and peak wellness or peak resilience are used like interchangeably. And the reality is, you cannot be the best like cyber person and triathlete and dad and husband all at the same time. Something's got to give. But you can be the most well version of yourself while still doing all four of those things, as long as you can accept that you can't be the best and that sometimes something's got to give. Like, I'm missing my son's ice hockey tonight, right? Because I'm doing this. I try not to miss that, but I'm not going to beat myself up about it because I'm like, yeah, it's like one out of, he goes every week and I'm there most weeks. And it's just about what matters to you as well.
I agree, and so it's quite a fascinating thing in triathlon, because if you've never raced one or seen one done, you've got the pro field, and that's the young whippersnappers, and they're the actually getting a bit older now. Like the winner of Kona was 38. But once, if you're not a pro, you go into your age groups, and so what they do is they break the race down just like a normal marathon, where it's like the 18 to 24, and then 25, 29, and then every 5-year increments. And one of my theories, because I like to think about this, is I would love to see a handicapped version of a race where, you know what, if you've got a kid, you get a 20-minute head start. You work more than on average 40 hours a week in your job, you get another 20-minute head start. So, I'd say this tongue in cheek, but you're exactly right. So, for example, I raced Geelong in February, March this year, right? And I swam well and I biked well and I fell apart on the run. But I knew that was coming because I had injuries, I had study to do, I'd had a trip to the United States with work. I was balancing a lot of things. And honestly, 5 years ago, I would have been in such a poor emotional state because I knew I was capable of more. And I still know I am capable of more, right? I know that. But having the courage to accept that I've not prioritized my training because I've had to do what I've done at work, and I've had to be there for my kids. Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. I get to be there for my kids, right? Like for me,
because it's important to you to be there for them. Yeah,
absolutely, right. And I know I'm not going to win Dad of the Year, right? That's because I'm not doing Betty Crocker stuff around the house, but I still want to be that person. And my KPI for that is when my kids become teenagers and they do something bad or naughty or mess up, I want them to be able to come to me as a safe place and a trusted person in their life and not be scared of the repercussions. And I only do that by being present and being, part of their lives now and seen to be that safe place now and establish those patterns. Now, if that means that I go 5-10 minutes slower on race day and I don't get the podium for an age group race because there's absolutely no sheep stations on the line there, I have to learn to be okay with that. And I'll be honest, I'm not there yet. I know that I can do more, but being able to forgive myself for not being perfect is a challenge. And I think that's a challenge a lot of military people face.
Yeah. Do you know what's interesting? A few things jump out at me there. One is that, and I don't want to psychoanalyze you, but that's just how my brain works. Can't help it. I wonder if part of the reason that it's been a challenge for you to get to the point where you are now, to be able to a bit more to have that self-compassion, is because you at a key point, you were told basically, or you were given a message that said you've got to keep these two things completely separate. And I wonder if some of that, what you internalize is, well, I'm not meant to be doing this thing, so if I'm doing it, I've got to be the best at it, as opposed to being allowed to just have something that you enjoy the challenge of. And so it puts more pressure on it. The other thing I think is interesting is that, like, yeah, I hear what you mean. It's a constant challenge for parents, right? You're always going to go, I was on the bike, I didn't do this, or I didn't do that, or I missed whatever. But I think there's something to kids seeing, hey, Dad has this thing that he cares about, and sometimes I see him get up at 3 a.m. and he's on that bike, and when I talk to him and he's on the bike and I'm like, why don't you get off? He's like, I want to get off, but I won't, kind of thing. I think that there's power to that. Like, I remember just a couple of years ago, my husband plays video games online with his brother because they live in different states, and he usually does it on like a Saturday night, right? And it was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and we'd had a pretty slow kind of day. And I was just like, oh, I haven't gone to the gym. I wouldn't mind going to the gym. So I said to my daughter, because she's a bit older, I was like, oh, I'm just going to go out and go to the gym. And she went, at 10 o'clock at night. And I went, what? Is there like a rule? And like, I went out, and then probably 6 months after that, it was the school holidays. They'd been doing nothing. They were stuck inside. And at like 9 p.m. at night, she goes, I'm going to go walk on the treadmill for half an hour. And I went, at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. And she went, what, is there a rule? And I was like, yeah, you got me.
Gotcha. And look, that's a really important point, right? And yeah, we could turn this into a fitness blog or whatever it is, but I don't want my kids to be ashamed of fitness and training. And it's this weird sort of revolution that I've gone through recently, especially in the new role. And my wife came out the other night because I was on the treadmill working my ass off. Like I was holding like 3 minutes 30 per kilometer, and it was a tough session. And I started laughing in the middle of it, just laughing my head off. And she's like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And I just loved what I was doing. It was just one of those moments of sheer bliss where you go, you know what? I'm right where I need to be. I'm working hard. I'm feeling good for it. I'm really proud. Right now, I have that pride in what I'm doing. And for me, it's so important that at some stage my kids see that, because I want them to emulate that. Not doing something because it matters to other people, not doing something because it looks good on a blog or on social media, not doing something because somebody else expects it from you, but something that just brings you joy. And I feel at the moment that we're so trapped, and I'm guilty of it too, that everything that we do needs to go on social media or needs to be shared and needs to be validated by other people. I have my kids just do something because it brings them joy. Hell, my son played naked in the sandpit the other day and he had the biggest grin on his face, right? It got weird when I joined him, but
Yeah, the neighbours didn't like that for some reason.
The neighbours didn't like it. The fact that I dragged the sandpit out to the street was a bit awkward. But no, but it's that thing that as a 4-year-old, he has so much joy in his life just by doing the things that he wants to do. And at some point we lose that. And for me, the suffering of training hard and watching that growth, that's what brings me joy. And it's taken me so long to realize that I love the process, and then the racing is just on top of that. Whereas, we're trained, especially in the military, to go, the value is in the result, right?
You have
Not
to,
the
you have
actual
to be
process.
good at it. And I think that you end up with two parts of that. In the military, it's the value is in the results and you have to be the best. And then in Australian society, if you're not the best, are you making money from it? And I hear what you're saying around. I'm like, you and I could chat fitness shit for forever. To take it away from the fitness space, I find the same thing with this podcast. So I spend a lot of time on this, and we've had a lot of long weekends recently. We're in May as we record this now. And at my workplace, they're very used to me. So they were like, "Do you have a good long weekend?" I went, "Yeah, I did. I got so much done on the pod." And they're like, "You're such a freak." But then there's other people in my life who, when I go, "Yeah, I did this," they go, "Oh, so like how do you make money from that?" And I was like, I don't make money from that. Like, it doesn't have enough followers to monetize it. And even if you could, I'd be reluctant to monetize it because I'd be so particular about how would we monetize it in the sense of what would be ethical. And then people go, "Well, why do you do it?" And I'm like, because I want to help people, and it brings me joy. Every time I post one and people go, "I loved that point that was made. I loved that point that Carolyn made." Like, that is meaningful to me. And sometimes it means I miss out on stuff with my kids, but my kids know and they're very proud of it. And so I think it doesn't have to just be about fitness, right? It's about you're modeling for your kids. It's okay to value something that is because it fits with who you are and who you want to be in the world. And that's a positive thing. I'm conscious of the time, so I would like to ask you my magic question, which is a tricky one. If you could change one thing about how the RAAFie does business, what would it be?
I would like to... Oh, that's a tough one. And excuse me for the ramble here, but I would like
I'll
to
cut
see...
it down. I was going to say, you just think, and then you start talking, and I'll cut the middle bit out.
Think then talk, not the other way around. May I have 2 things?
You can have 5 if you want, but I just say one so there's not pressure.
So there's 2 things. There's 2 things that I feel fundamentally the RAAFie should be doing. First of all, spending more time on the interview process and effectively having a blind web page for Defence Force careers where people then can come in and tell them what they want to do and then have jobs assigned to them, rather than walking and going, "I want to be an X," because that kind of fits. I want people to be able to go in and go, "I love building computers," and they go, "Cool, you would be a great net tech." Yeah. And so sort of a more of a push than a pull mindset. The other thing, and this is... Oh, God, if we could make this happen, I'd be so happy. Now, for context, we've not talked about my journey from logistics to aircrew, right? And one of the things that I noticed on my course, because I was surrounded by a bunch of advocates who went, "Well, recruiting told me that if I fail on nav course, I can go and be a loggy." And they're kind of similar. And having been a logistics officer before turning aircrew, I knew that was not a world that I wanted to go back to, right? Nothing wrong with it, and it was just not who I was. So what I would love to see is, before we start putting people into specialist roles and training in those roles, and we invest millions of dollars in the training for those individuals, give them a 6 to 12 month gap year of working in other cores, other categories, other musterings to go, this is what other trades do. So then if I fail, I know that I have to pick from one of these, and I really, really want to keep doing what I'm doing, Or before I go on a journey that doesn't align with what I wanted to do, you know what? Maybe I wouldn't mind being an engineer or something else. And so allowing people to not go through the heartache and shame of failing a course because it doesn't align with what they want to do, and allowing them to thrive in a trade that they care about, would just make everyone's lives so much easier.
Those are two amazing ideas. I don't think either of them will get off the ground, but I think they're both great. The first one, especially, I'm like, immediately my wheels start turning where I'm like, at recruiting, most people who went through will remember that like they did their test and then they got given a sheet and the sheet said you can do this job and this job and this job, right? And the only things that was testing was your aptitude in the sense of your intelligence tests. But it's interesting because the ADF has the capacity to buy like the online versions of personality tests and run those through recruiting as well, and use those to then help decide what kind of jobs. And also there are a lot of like occupational aptitude things of, do you like working with computers? Do you not? And I get in part why we don't. And part of it is simply that some young people, they don't know what they like yet. And so just letting them pick a job it makes sense. But it does feel like such an outdated model that is really, I think you're completely right, is that people they come in and they go, oh yeah, that looks good. And it actually just depends on whether the recruiting page has accurately captured what the job does, which it doesn't always do, right? Like there's a lot of things on there that aren't correct. And I love that. The second idea, I think the second idea, that the challenge would always be that defense wants to get someone in and locked in very fast. But I think you're right and I'm conscious of my own bias, which is having been a psych on defense bases, is I am naturally going to see the people who have been unhappy with their jobs, right? That's going to be the nature of the beast. You don't get people who come in because they're having a great day. But I often think about what a waste it is for defense when someone was clearly recruited to something they should have been recruited to, and then they couldn't just transfer because transferring into a different job is quite difficult. And so they end up unwell. They went up mentally unwell. When for some people, it's like the organization sometimes has this idea of like, well, if you can't be infantry, then you can't be a driver. And it's like, that's actually not true any more than it would be true to go, well, if you can't be a psych, you can't be infantry. I'm like, no, they're just different jobs. Not better, not worse, not harder, not easier. Like harder in some ways, easier in other ways for all of them. And I think it is a real waste that model is there, and that there is less opportunity, I think, for flexibility. But those are good answers.
Excellent. I pass. Excellent.
Yeah, you pass. Big tick. That has been so good. I'm so glad that we finally got to do this. For the people listening at home, there was many reschedules and they were mostly my fault, if I'm honest. And I feel bad because I said, I'm missing ice hockey, and I don't want Shep to feel bad because this last reschedule was because of him, but I think there were 2 before that because of me. So this is entirely my own fault. But I really wanted to get it done because what I don't want is for people to go, oh, it's just army people talking army, or someone said something weird in the comment the other day. They said, oh, it's just like she's interviewing people she knows. I'm actually not. They're not all people I know, but it might sound that way because I make an effort to get to know people before I interview them, like via email or but I do certainly sometimes interview people I know. But I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I love to hear that you've had positive transition, really, despite it maybe not being the way that you wanted it to be. And also that you're similar to me in the sense that I would say is you still really care about the people in defence and what defence does, and you have found a way to contribute without being in uniform. And I know you're still a reservist, but you're contributing in a way that works for you. And I think that's part of why I wanted to talk about this in the transition space, is there's a lot of ways to serve Australia and to serve defence even that don't require being in uniform. So thank you so much for that. Is there anything you wanted to add before we go?
Yeah, look, thank you very much for making the time and hearing me out. Like as I said, one of my biggest concerns is people see people who get out either for one of 2 reasons, and that's because they're chasing money or because they're so broken that they can't stay in. And so I'm really glad that somebody is sort of lifting the lid on that and sharing the word. And, as I said, I think there's a lot of stories out there, and no 2 stories are going to be the same. Yeah, look, appreciate it. Keep up the great work, and really, yeah, thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us today, whether you're listening to us on Spotify or watching us on YouTube. Just a reminder that nothing we've discussed is individual health advice, and there are links in the show notes to supports if you feel you need to talk to someone. Additionally, as always, this pod is the world according to Aleesha and Shep. Neither of us speak for any organisation we work with or have worked with. If you've been enjoying the pod, please share it, leave comments, or reach out on social media. Thanks.